Ladies and gentlemen, who's in charge of the border? Please welcome former Director of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Tom Homan. From Tennessee, Chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mark Green. And your host, Town Hall Senior Writer, Julio Rosas.
All right, well, hello everybody. As they said, my name is Julio Rosas, the senior writer over at Town Hall. I've been covering the border crisis that's been going on since 2021 pretty extensively. I just came back from Yuma and El Paso. With me here, we have the current chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Mr. Mark Green, and then we also have Tom Homan, who's been with federal law enforcement for many, many years. And so, Chairman, we just heard Senator Cruz talk about, wanting to get into the majority of the Senate, not to throw too much shade, but what's it like actually being in the majority right now?
It feels awesome for us to have taken control of the United States House of Representatives for the Republican Party, and really for the American people. So, yeah, it's awesome.
And so now that you guys are in the majority, what is the next step forward when it comes to legislation to tackling the border crisis?
So we have a bill that we're putting together in the Homeland Security Department, or in the committee, that really addresses, so there are different jurisdictions. It's really important for folks to understand. The Judiciary Committee has all of the Immigration and Nationalization Act stuff that needs to be fixed there. And a lot of the policies that are basically being, laws being disregarded by this administration fall under that jurisdiction. Under the jurisdiction of Homeland Security, it's about the people, it's about the technology, and it's about the infrastructure. And so we're going to do things that streamline the hiring process for Customs and Border Patrol. We're going to make sure they have the technology resources. We're going to build the wall. We're going to restart the contracts that were cut by by the administration. So we're going to get all that going again and just address those issues.
And so then, Tom, you've been in multiple administrations during your career. What do you think of legislation like that?
Well, the great thing about the chairman, Mark Green, is that we help write this legislation. He reached out to people like me, Mark Morgan, and other border security experts who spent decades doing this. And he came over and met with us and asked us, based on your experience, what's going to work, what's going to secure the border. So hats off to that. He's a lot like President Trump, who happens to be the greatest president in my lifetime, right? He listens to the men and women in enforcement. He listens to the men and women who actually did the job. He listens to the men and women who gave us the most secure border in my lifetime under President Trump. So he gets it. He just started, but he already got it. I can't think of a better man to be in the position than this guy right here.
Well, and to further answer the question, the plan is to get this bill through our markup at the end of March and on the House floor in April. So we will pass the most conservative border security bill in Homeland Security Committee history in April of this year.
And let me add this. There's a great bill on the floor right now. Chip Roy has a great bill called H.R. 29, which career law enforcement officers worked on. There's 2 or 3 Republican congressmen are pushing back on it. So I respectfully request to get their heads out of their asses and support a bill that will secure this border.
And so, obviously now, again, with you guys being the majority, you guys are not just going to do legislation, but there's also the issue with the current Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas.
Yeah.
We have, people who are already saying we need to vote on impeachment right away, but, and actually I'll be joining you down in McAllen, Texas on the 15th for your guys' first field hearing down there. Why is a hearing necessary like that before we get to something like impeachment?
So, well, first, my committee doesn't do the impeachment. The Judiciary Committee does impeachment. But my job is to build the case. So we're going to have several weeks of digging into the dereliction of duty, to the outright fraud and abuse that's been going on, looking at the human costs. Just this week we had I don't know if you guys saw it, but we had an amazing strong woman who came into our committee and talked about losing 2 children to fentanyl in one night. And it wasn't they thought they were taking one thing and it was laced with fentanyl and everybody died. Look, every American in our country is at risk for this. You pick up a dollar that's got fentanyl on it and you're dead. So this is a massive risk. We got to take this methodically with a process, build witnesses, hand that case off to Jim Jordan in judiciary, and he'll do what's necessary.
And so, Tom, do you have any history working with Mayorkas or kind of working with his orbit? Or, I mean, I don't know, you've been in law enforcement for a while.
Mayorkas needs to be impeached, bottom line, right? I've worked for 6 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. Every president I ever worked for, even Clinton and Obama, did some things to secure the border because they understood that you can't have national security without border security. Joe Biden's the first president in the history of the nation who came into office and unsecured the border. So what him and Secretary Mayorkas has done is borderline treasonous, in my opinion. They want to say that their policies are much more humane. That, you know, I've been called a racist, but President Trump's been called a racist. They say our policies were inhumane. Well, let me tell you something. Under President Trump, illegal immigration was down 83%, a 45-year low. Doctors Without Borders say 1/3 of women that make that journey through the cartels get raped. So when President Trump had illegal immigration down 83%, how many women weren't being raped? How many children didn't drown in the river? How many women and children weren't sex trafficked into the United States? How many Americans didn't die of fentanyl overdoses? How many known suspected terrorists didn't come across that border? This administration is the most inhumane administration I've ever seen. President Trump saved lives. The secure border saved lives. What this administration has done, since Joe Biden has been in office, we've got over 1,700 migrants dead on U.S. soil, a record. We got over 106,000 Americans dying from drug overdoses, a record. We got a record of women and children being sex trafficked across the border. The cartels are making billions. They've already arrested 156 known and suspected terrorists trying to cross the border. We got 1.2 million gotaways from 170 different countries. Many of those countries sponsor terrorism. If you don't think a single one of that 1.2 million didn't come across that border to try to destroy this nation, then you're wrong. This administration's killing people with their policies. They're un-American. So Mayorkas needs to be impeached, and right after him, Biden needs to be next.
The only thing, yeah, I agree 100%. The only thing that changed in January 21, we didn't cut the Border Patrol's budget, right? We didn't cut the number of Border Patrol agents. Biden killed 89 Trump policies. And that has resulted in 4.7 million encounters, 1.2 million gotaways. And you got to think about what's a gotaway. It's someone, right now, if you come to the border and you see a CBP officer and you turn yourself in, you're coming in the United States. So who would avoid those people? The 1.2 million people who run away from those guys don't want to be caught. And we have 8 states in the country with populations less than that. So it's insane, and it's not a money issue, although there are resources needed. It's not a people issue, although we need more people in certain areas. This is purely the decision of President Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas that have resulted in more people coming into the United States than 2 past presidents combined.
I just want to expand what he just said, because the most important thing we can say from this stage is that this president has created a national security crisis. This is the biggest national security failure I've seen since 9/11. Look, 9/11 terrorists killed several thousand people. The criminal cartels of Mexico have killed over 100,000 Americans. Bottom line, right? And the chairman's right. You got to pay the cartels a certain amount of money to cross the river and turn yourselves into Border Patrol. And what do? You get processed. You get taken to an airport, get an airline ticket at taxpayer expense to the city of your choice. Then you get work authorization. Then you're in the country for 3 or 4 years until your hearing finally comes across. Then when you get order removed, you're not being deported because the secretary says being in the country illegally is not enough to be arrested and removed. Who wouldn't take advantage of that giveaway program? Why would you pay cartels extra money to get away? Why? Because they don't want to be fingerprinted. They don't want to be vetted. There's a reason. These are your gang members. These are your criminals. These are your known suspected terrorists. I'm telling you, I don't know how many terrorists have crossed this border in the last 2 years, but someday we're going to find out, and it's going to be a bad day for America.
One last thing, if I can. Alejandro Mayorkas came before the Homeland Security Committee, and he said, we have operational control of the southern border. The drug cartels have operational control of our southern border. They're neutralizing CBP with mass waves of coyote-paid people. They're thinning the lines in the rural areas, and the drugs are pouring across our southern border. Alejandro Mayorkas lied, and Americans are dying.
And I'll add one more point to that. On all the other things he needs to be impeached for, Alejandro Mayorkas was deputy secretary in 2014, 2015. We had a surge of family units. I was third in command at ICE. I met with that man hundreds of times. How did we shut down that surge? We built detention facilities. We detained them. We held them long enough to see a judge. They got order removed. We put them on airplanes, sent them home. The numbers went down. What's Secretary Mayorkas doing now? He's not detaining them. They're not seeing a judge. Even if they lose their case, which 91% will lose their case, they're not being removed. He's doing the complete opposite of what he knows succeeded in 2014, 2015. This isn't mismanagement. This isn't incompetence. This is by design. They open this border up because they see some future political advantage of letting millions of people in. They think they're future Democratic voters? Maybe. But they also, when they signed those 87, 89 executive orders, what else did he do? He overturned the Trump census rule, which means millions of more people will be counted in the next census in sanctuary cities, which is going to result in more seats in the House for the Democrats. They sold this country out for future political power.
And now, one of the reasons why I really like that CPAC allows us to talk about this very important issue is because it's not just obviously adults, both Tom and the chairman have talked about, but also the children. And actually, you actually know it's a problem when even the mainstream media is talking about it, which is the significant increase in unaccompanied minors who have come through the southern border now being exploited in child labor. We've seen, they were talking about it in factories and talking about in other these pretty much unsafe working conditions. And as bad as this might sound, but those are the lucky ones because they're not the ones being sex trafficked, right? And so I remember this was back in 2021. We were watching Secretary Mayorkas, and he said, I believe it was from the White House, he said that if an unaccompanied minor comes to our southern border, we're not going to turn them away. Well, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think? We talk about the child separation policy, but there are parents voluntarily separating themselves from their kids because they're going to be allowed in and be put into this hazardous situation, whether it's on the route to the United States or after they get to the United States. So, Chairman, I know you touched on that during the hearing recently. When it comes to child labor, when it comes to this increase in child labor, what is the next step to kind of combat that?
So you got to scratch your head and basically agree that it's a horrible problem that can't be avoided if the New York Times is reporting negatively on what the administration is doing, right? I mean, that's what just happened this weekend about a child that had been sponsored as an unaccompanied child, minor, and they were brought to an area and basically were being used for child labor, exploited, essentially. The problem with that is, President Trump and these guys, they would do background checks on every single person in the home. And Alejandro Mayorkas signed a memorandum with the Secretary of HHS for these children. The sponsors aren't getting background checks now. These children's conditions now, what's happening to them, just like the blood of the 100,000 plus fentanyl deaths, all of this is on the hands of Alejandro Mayorkas. And that's why we're going to do what we're going to do.
Well, look, I wake up every day pissed off because this administration destroyed the most secure border in our lifetime, and I'm sick and tired of hearing about the family separation. And I'm still being sued over that, so come get me. I don't give a shit, right? Bottom line is, we enforce the law. American families, when I was a cop in New York and I arrest a father for domestic violence or someone for DUI, I separate that family. When you violate the law with a child, you're going to be separated. But you're right. 250,000 children have crossed this border since Joe Biden's been president. They chose to separate themselves. And the children aren't always children. Let's put this in perspective. When I was the ICE director under President Trump, we did Operation Matador, a gang enforcement operation on Long Island. We arrested just short of 500 gang members, most of them MS-13. 42% of them entered the country as a family unit. So the family units there's some valid family units that come across that border, I get it, but a lot of the family units aren't even family units. Under the Trump administration, we did DNA testing. What's the first thing the Biden administration did? Killed DNA. We don't know how many families are actually families. So children are being trafficked. Under this administration, they've lost track of 40,000 kids already. 40,000 kids, we don't know where they're at. Now, they find them in forced labor. I guarantee there's some in child pornography movies now. I don't give a shit what anybody says. This border has put a lot of lives in danger, and I'm so afraid of what we're going to find out several years down the road, what these children, what kind of conditions they're put in. People call me anti-immigrant every day. I'm not. I believe in immigration, legal immigration. They don't understand when you make the promises this administration's made that you can cross the border, you won't be detained, we'll give you a work authorization, and guess what? ICE can't arrest you because you sit here illegally. When you make those type of promises, the most vulnerable people in the world are going to put themselves in the hands of these cartels to be smuggled across the border. This administration's policies are dumb. They're killing a record number of Americans. They've killed a record number of migrants. And God help us, thousands of these children are in very bad situations right now. And someday it's going to come out, and we need to hold these people responsible.
Amen. Amen.
Now, one thing I've noticed in the few hearings that you guys have held in the House, Democrats have always tried to separate the fact that, like, well, the fentanyl issue and migration issue, they're basically two separate things. Because, well, fentanyl is mostly being trafficked through the ports of entry by American citizens. That's kind of the talking point. And, you know, if you know anything about how cartels operate, it's not like they separate by LLC, right? I mean, it's not like, well, that's our 401c and that's all that. I mean, all the money. It's common sense. It's common sense. And the thinking is, of course, you know, if you have manned security, like a port of entry 100% of the time, of course, you're going to interdict more people, not just drugs, but also people who are wanted out on criminal charges. So, Chairman, so explain to people how kind of the fentanyl issue is not really affected by what's happening when it comes to people illegally crossing.
Yeah, so at the ports of entry during COVID, we shut them down except for essential traffic. So we closed the ports of entry. If that's the only place where the fentanyl's coming across, why did fentanyl still pour into the country? And if the administration talks about, oh gosh, we're doing such a better job because we're getting more fentanyl at the ports of entry, why did the price of fentanyl go on the street, a hit of fentanyl in January of 21, go from $95 to $28 a hit? It's simple supply demand. Now, I wouldn't expect Joe Biden to get supply demand. That's why this inflation crisis is the way it is. But that's why the fentanyl's pouring across our southern border in between the ports of entry. We have video from Arizona, from Texas ranchers using game camera footage of camouflage wearing, carpet shoe wearing, backpacks, and we find the backpacks 5 miles into the border, dumped on the ground, 500-600 of them. You know it's fentanyl, and it's all over the country.
And one thing that I really want to emphasize is how the cartels operate. So there's a reporter that's based in Mexico. He's been covering the border covering the drug war for a long time. He recently had a dispatch out of Sinaloa. You can buy cocaine, you can buy weed in that territory controlled by the Sinaloa cartel. Guess what you can't buy? You cannot buy fentanyl in Mexico. One of the only places that I'm aware of where you can buy fentanyl in Mexico is in the slums of Tijuana. So think about that. The Mexican cartels won't allow fentanyl to be sold where they live and where they have their families and friends, right? So that speaks to the profitability, and it speaks to just they know how deadly that is.
Well, look, I watched that hearing the other day. And the person that stole the show was the Angel mom who lost 2 boys to fentanyl. The guy from Cato, if you're watching, you're a moron. He's sitting there testifying in front of Congress saying 1% of fentanyl comes through the port of entry. How does he know? He's never wore the uniform. He's never been down there and fighting the war. Bottom line is that the Democrats want you to believe that most of the fentanyl comes through the port of entry because they want to ignore the fact that most of it comes between the ports of entry illegally. The reason most of fentanyl doesn't come through a port of entry, most of it seized at a port of entry. And why is that? Because every vehicle stopped. Every driver spoken to. Depending on his responses, they may secondary him. There's also the CBP targeting system. It's a computer system. I can't tell you what's in it because it's law enforcement sensitive. When they put the license plate number in, based on a bunch of intelligence from a bunch of different sources, it may say, you know what, this might be a car you want a secondary. So of course you're seizing more fentanyl at port of entries. Everybody's getting stopped between the port of entries. Right now, this administration has caused such a huge immigration crisis that 70 to 80% of Border Patrol agents have been pulled off the line, changing diapers, making baby formula, making hospital runs. So the cartels are going to use the route to release resistance. And that's going to be where there's no Border Patrol agents. So most of the fentanyl is coming between the port of entries. Don't buy the Democrats' lies. It's inaccurate. It's not a coincidence. In the biggest illegal immigration crisis we've ever seen, we have record numbers of overdose deaths. That's because they're coming across an open border that this administration purposely created.
Amen.
And so to wrap up our great panel, Tom, you've been doing this for over 20 years. What does the future hold?
The future? I'll tell you anything I told President Trump. He comes back, I come back, we fix this shit. No one did more. No one did more to secure this border than President Trump. If you don't like him, then you don't like me. The bottom line is, no one did more. Bottom line, look at the data. I made a commitment. I even told him I come back for free. I'm so pissed off.
Chairman, what does the future hold for the current border crisis?
Well, the near future is a border trip. We're going to do our first hearing where we take the Democrats to the border and we do a hearing on the border in McAllen, Texas. And we're going to have our bill, like I said, get marked up the last week of March. We'll put that bill on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives in April, and we will pass that bill, the most comprehensive and conservative border security bill in the history of this country. And then we're going to bring Mr. Mayorkas in for I would say, a 6-month-long colonoscopy.
And let me add one more thing. I'm happy to be on the stage with the next Secretary of Homeland Security on the Trump administration, first of all. And second of all, if I offended anybody today with my language, I don't care.
All right, thank you very much.
Great to be with you guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.